I'm Brent Goff. It's good to have you with us on this Monday. Israeli reservists are gathering at assembly points in northern Israel tonight amid reports that a ground invasion of Lebanon is imminent. Israeli warplanes have intensified bombings in southern Lebanon, as well as the capital Beirut, as the army amasses tanks and armored vehicles along its northern border. Despite pleas from many international allies for an immediate ceasefire, Israel says that it will not stop its military campaign in Lebanon until all 60,000 Israelis displaced by Hezbollah's rockets can return to their homes. All right, journalist Balig Sladeen, he's following this story for us from Tel Aviv. Balig, what do you make of those media reports? Is an Israeli ground offensive in Lebanon, is it imminent?
Well, just a few minutes ago, the IDF, the Israeli military, has announced officially that the towns that are close to the border, so Metula and Kfar Giladi, parts of other towns in that area, Israeli settlements, are actually going to be military sites that no one can get into it, which means that we are talking about a possible incursion in the coming hours or in the coming days. But let's be clear about this. It's not going to be a wide-scale incursion, any occupation, long-term occupation. We are talking about limited operations, and that's what we're getting from the different sources, also inside Israel, but also outside Israel, even officially by the U.S. officials, including Secretary Austin, as well as the other officials in the Biden administration, that we're talking about a number of operations, limited operations, that will target Hezbollah's infrastructure and the military infrastructures there right beside the border, and not a wide-scale operation. But no one knows whether this is only the beginning of such operation, just like it happened at the Gaza Strip back in last October, or it's going to be the end game for Israel, just to deal with the military infrastructure that is close to the border in order to secure the return of the Israeli civilians to their homes.
Earlier today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the Iranian people directly. Take a listen to part of what he said.
There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There's nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country. With every passing moment, the regime is bringing you, the noble Persian people, closer to the abyss. I know you don't support the rapists and murderers of Hamas and Hezbollah, but your leaders do. You deserve more. The people of Iran should know Israel stands with you. May we together know a future of prosperity and peace.
Balig, what do you think Netanyahu is trying to achieve with that message?
Well, Netanyahu knows and Israel knows that the biggest weakness for the Iranian regime is the different fractions and ethnicities and different sects inside Iran. They know that a military operation against Iran, this huge country, with its, of course, very capable army and also the Revolutionary Guards Corps, it will not be possible to defeat them militarily, or at least not without any huge price from Israel. So the only way in order to pressure Iran, even if it's not the ultimate goal to make the regime collapse, is actually encourage these fractions to put pressure on the Iranian regime. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, let's set the record straight. Just a few moments ago, this evening, the censorship in Israel allowed to announce that one of the aims of this whole war, or this whole operation that Israel has been conducting since last year, is to avoid a military escalation against Iran. But last Thursday, this goal was changed, which means that Israel is also prepared for an exchange of fire with Iran. But we're talking about two countries that are very far away from each other. The only capability that Iran has is the missiles and rockets and drones that it can fire, and Israel also has the aerial capabilities. But this is possible, this could happen, especially if we're talking about a larger scale operation in Lebanon.
That's right. All fears growing to a wider war in the Middle East tonight. Journalist Balig Sladeen with the latest from Tel Aviv. Balig, thank you. Hezbollah's deputy leader says that his forces are primed and ready to fight a possible ground incursion by the Israeli military into Lebanon. Naim Qassem was speaking in his first public appearance since the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nassrallah, was killed in an Israeli airstrike last week. Qassem also said a new leader of Hezbollah would be announced soon. Well, I'm joined now by Randa. She is an analyst at the Middle East Institute. It's good to have you with us this evening. What do you make of Qassem's message that Hezbollah is ready for an Israeli ground invasion? Is it?
I mean, this is a terrain they are very familiar with. It is their villages. Their fighters know these villages inside out. Israel will be invading their territory, and they have fought with them in the past in 2006 and brought that war to its standstill and forced Israel to agree to a ceasefire. And I think despite the decapitation of its leaders, I think its field commanders are still there and its fighters are still there. And in fact, now they are motivated even more to avenge the assassination of their Secretary General.
Who do you think is going to be the next leader of Hezbollah?
Look, there are two names that are most talked about as possibly succeeding Sayyid Nasrallah. The first one is Naim Qassem, his deputy, who just spoke this morning and gave a speech about where they are, their readiness to fight this war. And the second one is the chairman of their executive council, Hashim Safiyuddin, who is Sayyid Nasrallah's cousin. And of the two, in my opinion, Sayyid Safiyuddin is more likely than Naim Qassem, although the fact that Sheikh Qassem has been the number two for so long that it might be somehow politically incorrect to bypass him. And so what we might see is a transitional leadership. We might see Sheikh Qassem becoming the next Secretary General, while the real power rests in the hands of people like Hashim Safiyuddin and other members of the Jihadi Council, as well as the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which will now play more of a role in the running of Hezbollah's affairs than prior to Nasrallah's assassination.
So let me ask you then, if there is an Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon, are you clear on what would be the end game there? What would be the aim of the Israeli military?
I don't know. That's a question I always ask. I mean, definitely what Israel has achieved today has been tactically very successful, whether it's, technologically, the decapitation of the command structure, the assassination of of Sayyid Nasrallah. I mean, for Israel and for a lot of its supporters around the world, this has been tactically very successful. But I have yet to figure out or to understand how this will be leveraged, including the ground invasion, how it will be leveraged into achieving their strategic objective, which they stated as basically regaining order and control of the northern part of Israel, stopping Hezbollah from launching rockets toward those communities, and enabling 60,000 plus of their citizens to return to their communities in northern Israel. I don't see how these tactical achievements are going to be leveraged into a strategic objective, especially if they get entrapped in a long, protracted invasion, albeit limited, as they say, of southern Lebanon, and possibly long-term occupation of that stretch of land in southern Lebanon.
Well, let's talk about for a moment efforts to stop and prevent a ground invasion. I want you to take a listen to what U.S. President Biden said about that today. Take a listen.
Well, just the fact that Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plans?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now. Thanks.
Do you expect Iran to retaliate?
So the president is comfortable with them stopping. I mean, it seems like the red lines for Israel shift a lot in this U.S. administration. I mean, does the Israeli government, does it even care about what the U.S. president says at this point?
I mean, that's a very good question. I don't know. I mean, after all, this is an administration that is in the last leg, basically, on the last leg of its term. And whether Mr. Netanyahu cares to what President Biden says, and President Biden has been unwilling to use his leverage, especially when it comes to weapons transfer, especially when it comes to transferring jet fuel to Israeli Air Force. And so, we have heard this talk about we need a ceasefire now. When he talked about Gaza recently, right? And so I don't know whether he is sincere about it. And two, whether he is willing to use his leverage, and if he does use his leverage, whether it will make any difference with Bibi Netanyahu's political calculus.
But what about the leverage of the world's biggest military? The U.S. is sending a few thousand more troops to the Middle East. What do you think the purpose of that is?
And exactly, that's a message that contradicts a ceasefire. I mean, they keep saying that the purpose of this increasing military presence is twofold. One is to protect their own troops that are present in the Middle East. And two, especially from Iranian attacks, I'm assuming, and from Iranian proxies in the region. And two, to defend Israel. So, I mean, on one hand, he wants Israel to go to a ceasefire, while Israel is planning a ground invasion. And by the way, Israel can say all it wants, limited, whatever. But the other side, in this case, Hezbollah, will have a say also in what kind of invasion it's going to be, and how costly it's going to be for Israel. And so the question is, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, we are now at a standstill, and things will evolve, and we have to follow things as they are evolving.
Randa Sladeen with the Middle East Institute. Ms. Sladeen, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, what can Europe do in this situation? EU foreign ministers met on short notice this evening for a video call to discuss the situation in Lebanon. Let's go now to our Brussels correspondent, Rosie Birchard. She's following this story for us. So what more do we know about this? I mean, I dare say, a last-minute emergency meeting among EU foreign ministers?
The meeting has wrapped up, and we've heard from EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell speaking to press. He said quite clearly this is a moment of truth for Lebanon. That's how he described it. He reiterated the EU's call for an immediate cross-border ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, and he said with quite a clear tone there that any military intervention, any further military intervention would seriously aggravate the situation, he said, and must be avoided. Borrell has also in the past talked about arguing that civilians are paying a much too heavy price here, civilians being caught in the crossfire. And with that in mind, the EU has also in the past 24 hours released an additional 10 million euros in humanitarian funding for civilians.
So at the end of the day, have these types of demands, recommendations coming from Brussels, from the European Union, do they really make an impression on Israel? Have we seen them make a difference in the past?
No, we absolutely haven't seen them make a difference in the past. In fact, the EU has really been seen as much more of a kind of bystander than a broker over this past year of conflict in Gaza. And then, of course, this escalating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, those exchanges of fire. Now, the European Union would be seen as an actor that could have some leverage over Israel, but it has been incredibly divided internally. And therefore, it's been very difficult for the EU to take any decisions when it comes to its policy on the Middle East, and particularly on relations with Israel. We're seeing a slightly different situation now as we see Israel-Hezbollah fighting escalating. In this situation, the EU has been moving more quickly in terms of its diplomacy. It's been coming up with statements more swiftly. We're talking about days instead of weeks or months. But we've also seen a difference in this situation, and that is one key player the EU has in its own grouping, and that is France. It's seen as more of a player in Lebanon, not an uncontroversial one. It is a former colonial power, and it's also one of the only Western powers which has kept up open communications with Hezbollah. Now, will that make any difference on the ground? Well, really hard to say, and certainly it could be a case, as what we've seen so far, is that Western diplomacy, European diplomacy falling on deaf ears, while civilians find themselves very much caught up in a distressing situation on the ground there. And some analysts saying, look, who is Hezbollah going to listen to? It's Iran, not the European Union. And in terms of Israel, well, they're more the diplomatic weight there lies rather with Washington. That's what we're hearing from experts in any case.
Our correspondent Rosie Birchard with the latest from Brussels tonight. Rosie, thank you.